Incident response is not cheap. It is a significant financial cost for the organization if you have to go down that route to do the forensics, to do the incident response. That preparation is key. What's the Boy Scout motto? Be prepared. That's really key when it comes down to incidents. And, I despite the fact that I work in incident response, I don't want organizations to have incidents.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hello, I'm your host, Accidental CISO, and you are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show. Welcome back. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. We've put together another fantastic episode for you, and we really hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, you can be a part of the show. We're always looking for callers, so if you have questions about cybersecurity in your small business, be sure to sign up to ask a question. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber incident response in small businesses. My guest host today is, of course, another experienced industry veteran. For more than 20 years now, he's been responding to cyber incidents, analyzing malware, performing digital forensics investigations, and pretty much doing anything else you can think of that's involved with protecting data and systems. Today, he works for TrustedSec, where he leads their amazing incident response team. His team handles cyber incidents for companies large and small. When he isn't working and fighting cyber fires, he's a huge gaming geek and author. His work has been published in several role-playing game books. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Tyler Hudak.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Man, it is great having you here. So this show is for business leaders in small organizations, and the term incident response may not be something that our listeners are familiar with. Can you give a quick explanation of what we mean when we talk about incident response?
Yeah, absolutely. So incident response is really the process of reacting to some type of cybersecurity incident. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be a cybersecurity incident. You can absolutely have it where you're reacting to a natural disaster or a plague or something like that, something that's affecting business. But I'm just going to focus on cybersecurity. It's a reactive process where you are trying to basically resolve whatever the incident is to get back to normal operations. And you typically do this. There are a couple phases that are typically defined. I think NIST was the first one who defined these phases, and then a lot of other organizations have adopted them. But it basically boils down to, first thing you do is you detect the incident. You detect something that's going on. Sometimes it's really obvious with something like a ransomware attack. Sometimes it's not as obvious if it's like an email account that has been compromised. But once that's detected, then you start investigating it. You want to find out what happened. Then you do what's called containment. And this is where you take whatever actions are necessary to prevent the incident from causing further damage. So, for example, if you had a malware outbreak, you would take those systems offline, and that would prevent the malware from spreading. If you had a user ID that was compromised, you'd probably disable that user ID and so on. Then you move into eradication, which is where you are just removing the attacker or whatever the cause of the incident is from your environment, and then restoring back to normal operations, which is really the goal of any incident response. You want to get back to what you're used to doing. You want to get back to that normal operations. But that's not the final phase. The final phase is one that a lot of companies tend to skip, and that's really kind of that after-action lessons learned, learning what happened from that. All of those combined, from detection all the way to that lessons learned, is really the whole incident response process.
Yes, it's a lot of steps strung all together there. A lot to do and a lot of really specialized knowledge that only comes with experience as you go through that. At least that's what I've seen.
I would 100% agree with that. You can read about all of the ransomware attacks you want or denial of service attacks that you want and so on, but until you actually live through it, you're not going to get all those little gotchas that you wouldn't know otherwise, other than from that experience. Which honestly, and I think we'll definitely talk about this later on. IR services, they're not cheap. Unfortunately, they are pretty expensive because of that specialized knowledge that's needed. You're getting somebody who hopefully has that experience in, knowing what to do and how to do it properly to get you back up as fast as possible.
Yeah. I'm curious, your hobby with role-playing games, are there any parallels you see between that hobby and what you do with incident response?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So ironically, right after we're done, I'm going up to B-Sides Rochester to talk about this exact topic tomorrow. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge gaming geek, and there are, I think, a couple aspects of kind of gaming in general, or even just like role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, absolutely there are parallels in incident response. The first is, I think, on any incident, you need to be able to think fast and pivot. Things are happening quickly during an incident. It's a very high-stress environment. There's a lot of anxiety going on, and so you kind of have to be able to think calmly and think through the problem and the situation. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a difference between dealing with a ransomware attack affecting a Fortune 500 company versus attacking a dragon in Dungeons and Dragons, but you still, there are still those kind of like analytical, critical thinking skills that you have. Additionally, one of the things that you can do to kind of prepare yourself for an incident is what's called a tabletop exercise. And there is little difference, honestly, between playing or running a role-playing game and a tabletop exercise. They're almost exactly the same. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of difference because you're not, going up against goblins. You're going up against, whatever, ransomware or an attacker or something like that. But all of those, skills that I've learned from, just doing and playing in role-playing games has absolutely helped me in my current career and all of that. As weird as it sounds, it really has.
And, you mentioned sort of all those phases as business leaders want to put together, a plan for responding to incidents in their organization. What are some of the fundamental things that you see that small businesses really need to be making sure that they're thinking about as they put together these plans in order to be prepared for the worst?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. To have that plan to begin with, a lot of organizations, not just small organizations, even large organizations, they don't have an IR plan, and you need that. It doesn't need to be anything huge, especially for a small business. I would say that you would probably want to have that document, and it specifies who is responsible for what. So, who is going to lead the incident, who calls your IT provider, who calls the lawyers, what are the lawyers going to do, all of that. And along those lines, not only who's responsible for what, but who are you going to call and in what order? Do you call cyber insurance if you have it? Do you call your IT provider? Do you call legal? Do you have crisis communications? And it's important to know which order that you're doing that in because in my experience, sometimes your legal team wants called first so they can put that incident under privilege and protect you. Sometimes you're required to call cyber insurance first. And so you want to have that written down so that in the midst of that very crazy anxiety-inducing, first couple minutes or hours of that incident, you don't have to rely on memory. You have it written down. And like I said, IR plans for larger companies will probably have more in it, but small businesses, I would say that that's probably the minimum that they need. And then not only once you have that plan, test it out. I mentioned the tabletop exercises. That's really the best way to do that. And all a tabletop exercise is sitting down with the right people in your organization, maybe some of your third-party providers, and walking through a mock scenario. You say something like, all right, well, let's pretend that one of our accounts, our email accounts got hacked, or we have ransomware in the environment, or we had a malicious insider who took our data and posted it online, or something like that. And you step through all of how you would expect the incidents to go. Who are you calling? All right, great. We call, Bob over in IT. What are you doing? Bob, when we tell you this, what are you doing? And so on. And you just got to go through that to make sure that your plan that it works like you expect it to, and that your tools work like they should. You don't have any gaps, and that you that your providers do what you expect them to. A great example I have of this is once I was on a tabletop exercise with an organization, and we had their third party security provider on, and we were walking through trying to get an answer of, all right, well, who's going to do forensics on these systems? We have these systems that were compromised. The client needs answers, and the security company kept kind of like dancing around it a little bit around that, and until finally I said, all right, well, look, here's the situation. We have this hard drive. It needs to be forensically analyzed. Are you going to do that? And they said no. And this was a complete shock to our client because our client thought that they were going to do this, and so they immediately had a gap that they had to fill. So have that IR plan, test it. And I think, the last fundamental thing that I would, kind of throw out there is incidents are inevitable. And so back up your data, make sure you have those backups, especially for some type of like destructive attack like ransomware. And not only have those backups, but keep them offline and offsite. At least have one copy that's offsite in a safe somewhere and test those backups. Finally, too, if your third-party provider is doing your backups, test it out. Don't take them at their word. One of the first incidents that I ever worked when I came over to TrustedSec was for this organization who got hit with ransomware. And they're a really small organization. And so they had outsourced their IT. Their IT had set up backup software for them. But after the ransomware, they found out that, the server that it was backing up to was in this guy's basement, and it hadn't worked for over 2 or 3 months. And he just had never gotten around to fixing it. So the organization didn't have backups. I've even been on some where the third-party provider had done backups, but they forgot the password to the backups. So the backups were there. They were being encrypted like they should, but you couldn't restore because nobody knew how to decrypt the passwords, like legitimately decrypt, not ransomware decrypt.
Ouch, that's rough. I mean, that's heartbreaking. I've done some incident response engagements as well over my career, and not having viable backups when you need them is just one of those heartbreaking things that happens, because there is nothing you can do to help them with that. If something's gone, it's not there. Like, it's just not there. There's no magic wand that anyone can just wave and make something show up. As you go through this, there's so many decisions that have to be made very quickly as you go through this. And one of the benefits of having somebody like you or your team at TrustedSec come in to help guide people through this, keep them from making mistakes as they go through and have to make these decisions very quickly. What are some of the biggest mistakes that an organization might make if they don't have that expert guidance through an incident response process?
Yeah, I think actually the mistakes that I see are, they start before an incident even happens. So we already talked about, make sure you have that plan. That plan is really important. Another mistake that I see a lot is assuming that, you won't have an incident. We hear a lot from people, we're not a target. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. Yeah, you may not be a target for like a state-sponsored attack group, but if you have computers and you have money, then you're a target. I would say in terms of the different types of attacks that we see, especially going after small businesses, the number one are business email compromises, where somebody gets into an email account and starts sending out fake invoices that get paid, or even just like the gift card scams that are going around where, you get this email or text supposedly from your CEO saying, hey, I need you to go out and buy these gift cards. Or, somebody calls and says, hey, we're the FBI. Your boss was just arrested. We need you to go buy these gift cards or else you're going to get arrested too. That happens to small businesses all the time. So, you may not necessarily have the data that somebody wants, but you have money and that's what they want. Assuming you won't have an incident and then, just going through and not preparing for one. Like I said, compromises are inevitable. Have that plan, know who to call for incident response, for IT, for legal, for communications. All of that, at least know beforehand. Even if you don't have like a retainer set up, just know who you're going to call initially. And then finally, the biggest mistake that I see is waiting to ask for help. If something happens, please don't wait. The busiest time for my team is Friday afternoon, because what happens is somebody will have an incident early on in the week. They feel like they can help or they can handle it, and then it just throughout the week, it tends to spiral out of control, and then we get called Friday afternoon. The problem with that is my team as an incident response team, and really any incident response team in existence. We only have so much availability. And if you're call number 6 on Friday afternoon, chances are we're not going to be able to help you, or it's going to be a week or two before we can help you. Depending on the type of organization you're in, if you're a state related company, like a state government or city government, or something related to that, there are certain groups that you can go to for free incident response. Those, though, they have a waiting time of at least 3 to 4 weeks. So the sooner you can contact somebody, the more likely you're going to be able to resolve it successfully and get the information that you need.
3 to 4 weeks is forever in one of these sort of situations. If you were to take, all of this, kind of boil it down, if there was like one thing you wanted every small business owner to know about incident response, what would that one thing be?
Honestly, it's kind of just what to expect during an incident. Yeah, I think this is really just like a big unknown that nobody, especially a lot of the businesses who call us for the first time who aren't previous clients. I should clarify, Trust2Sec does more than just incident response. So, we do have clients that call us for other things, but there's, I think, a lot of unknowns as to, what exactly to expect during an incident. The best thing that I could say is, and I'll give you a link for this. One of my coworkers, Liz Waddell, a couple years ago, she did a presentation that's on YouTube called "Help, We Need an Adult Engaging an External IR Team." And basically, she just walks through all of the steps of, this is what an incident looks like. When you call a IR team, this is what you should expect. And I think, the talk is really only like 30 minutes long. And there is just a huge amount of information in there. So I'd highly recommend watching that and getting an idea of, when I call incident response or I call somebody, this is what I should expect to happen. And like I said before too, another thing to remember is IR is not cheap, unfortunately. It is probably one of the more expensive services out there. It's not the most expensive service, security related, but it gets up there at times. And because of that, we have a lot of people or organizations who call us and, they kind of get that sticker shock. But understand, too, that you may be required to have incident response done depending on your organization and the type of data you have. You've got insurance may require you to do it. Now, in my experience, insurance usually can get you a better rate if you have cyber insurance. They have provider panels that you can get something cheaper on, but you may have regulatory reasons to do incident response. Your clients and partners, you may have contractual obligations to do incident response. So there are going to be a lot of reasons why you might need to do it. And so it's kind of taking that into account beforehand so you understand that, this cost could happen, I think is really important.
Excellent. This has been really, really helpful. And I hope that our listeners find this useful, because this is not a topic that I think a lot of small business owners really think about on a regular basis. I know they know that it's dangerous and it's scary to think about getting hacked or something or having a breach, but to actually think through this stuff, I think a lot of them probably don't do that. So I hope that our listeners, are finding this really, really helpful. Speaking of listeners, we have a couple of callers from our audience that want to ask us some questions. So if you're ready to go to the phones, we can go and start taking some calls. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great.
Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
So here we are jumping into the phones. We have our first caller waiting on the line for us. Hello, how is it going today?
Thanks for having me on, AC. I'm Holler from New York. I recently moved from a large enterprise. The last couple of places I was at was large. Now I'm at a small organization with about 300 individuals. And so one of the things that I've been hit with is being handed off, here's some vendors that want to talk to you, in your new role. And I wanted to know, what should a small or medium-sized business be looking for in guidance in topics of DR and IC? Because everybody wants to sell me something.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you say IC, does it DR?
I'm sorry, IR.
Oh, okay. All right. So DR, disaster recovery, and IR being incident response. Okay, gotcha. So First off, you're right. If any vendor who wants to talk to you, they're going to be trying to sell you something. This coming from somebody who works for a vendor. There are really two, especially for smaller businesses, there's two resources that I know of, AC. I'm not sure if, I'm sure you probably know of others, but CISA.gov, they have what's called the cyber guidance for small businesses. It's a lot of really good guides on, for the smaller businesses, how do you protect yourself? What should you be doing? Not necessarily just in disaster recovery and incident response, but in all areas of security. Additionally, NIST has their own version as well called the Small Business Cybersecurity Corner. And, I think between the two of these are going to have a lot of really good guides on the topics. For incident response and disaster recovery, I think after that, you're probably, going to be getting into looking into specific topics, or maybe even places like ISACs, or if you have a local InfraGard or ISACA, or something like that, they'll have likely information for you, or places that you can go to grab that. But in terms of what to look for, or what type of information you should be getting, I guess it really depends on the maturity of your organization. If you're just starting out, you'd probably want to look for things like how to set up that incident response program, how to write an incident response plan, how to detect and protect yourself. If you've already kind of gone through that and you're starting to walk through those maturity steps, then probably want to look at maybe a little bit more advanced topics. Start digging into things like doing a threat hunt, or how would you do a threat hunt in order to kind of proactively look for those attackers in your environment. So incident response is reactive, threat hunting is proactive, where you're just kind of assuming you've been breached and you're going out and kind of looking for that stuff. And you can obviously do it yourself or hire somebody to do it, and so on. But I think a lot of the information that you would want to find is really, what does a good incident response program look like for you and for your industry? Each vertical, I think, kind of has its own mindset or requirements for that. So, if you're in manufacturing, that's going to look different than healthcare, than education, than, any other vertical. AC, let me kind of throw this to you. I'm sure you have some good resources too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of small businesses, especially, it seems like every episode it ends up coming up, managed service providers. A lot of small businesses are using IT managed service providers to provide just basic IT support because they're not a large enough organization to have a full-time IT staff. Those managed service providers should be able to give you some guidance, and a lot of times they will have an incident response firm that they work with regularly that can help. So your IT provider, if you have one of these managed service providers, may be able to provide you some help in finding a partner that they are already familiar with and used to working with, and can maybe get you set up with a retainer or something like that with an IR provider as well, so that when you do have something go wrong and you need them, heaven forbid, you're not waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks for them to be able to get to you. Having that relationship in place ahead of time through that managed service provider, through a retainer or something like that, may help you be able to get a hold of somebody to ask the questions much more early on. And if you know who that's going to be, Tyler talked about it earlier in the show, if you know who that's going to be, you don't have that sort of cognitive load of just trying to figure out who even should I call, to make you decide, well, I don't know if it's bad enough if I should call anybody, because I don't want to even have to figure out who to call at that point. If you already know who to call, you can call them and talk to them, and they can help you very quickly figure out, yes, do we need to spin up a response, or is this likely just an IT operations problem or something?
Thank you. And I guess following up with that, when it comes to testing disaster recovery or incident response, how often should a smaller business be doing that? Is that quarterly, yearly? What should we be aiming for?
In my opinion, it's at minimum once a year. It would be better if you could do it quarterly. One of the recommendations that I would make is make sure that you're not just doing it for IT or the technical sides of the business. Make sure that the business side is in there as well, because they're going to be the decision makers in some of these incidents. So, for example, if you did a IR drill or disaster recovery drill on ransomware. You need to talk about, do you pay the ransom? IT is not going to be deciding that. That's going to be, your business senior leadership within your organization and legal and so on. You're going to have to communicate to clients, to partners, to internal employees, to the media. Again, IT is not, or hopefully isn't the ones who are doing that. Your corporate communications or marketing or somebody is going to have to do that. So, when you do these exercises, make sure that they're involved. And when you do that, now, do you need to have them on every one? No, it probably doesn't make sense to, especially if you're doing like a pure technical one. But I would say at least once a year, make sure that they're involved so that they can, kind of see, that side of it too, and understand that they do need to make decisions and be a part of, some of these.
And something I talk with my clients about too is the different drills that they need to be doing. So IR, incident response, is one piece for cyber incidents, but just business continuity in general is going to be a different plan. And disaster recovery is going to be a different plan. And they are interrelated to some degree, but each of those three things need to be thought through, as Tyler said, at least annually when you go through these. And some things need to be tested more regularly than that. We talked very early on in the show about backups and having viable backups that you're actually capable of restoring. You don't want to be in the middle of an IR and realize that your backup can't restore, because all of a sudden now you're sitting in the war room going, well, looks like we got to pay the ransom. Game over, man. Because you can't restore the data at that point. It's just gone. So pieces of your disaster recovery plan, can we restore our data from backups? Those need to be done more regularly than once a year, because you don't want to find out that your backups haven't been working for the last 30 or 60 days at the worst opportunity or worst time, most inopportune time for that. So I would say, it depends on the pieces of it. Some pieces are more important to test regularly, and then the entire plan end to end, at least annually, but make sure that you're testing each of those three different things. Business continuity being more about just, can we operate the business if there's a lot of times natural disasters, anything that kind of happens in the business environment around you. Disaster recovery is more about being able to recover and restore services when something happens. And then incident response is when you've got like an active threat, some sort of cyber thing going on in your system.
Just to kind of add to that a little bit, you brought up a really good point, of testing, all three of these. I think another thing that organizations need to realize is that most disaster recovery or business continuity plans, they're meant for that, like a data center going down or, a natural disaster. They're not meant to respond to a ransomware attack that takes down your entire IT infrastructure, like literally everything gone. And so you need to take that into account, when you're doing that. Imagine ransomware is probably the closest thing to waking up one morning and everything is gone in your organization, all of your resources. And so at that point, what do you do from there? Because a lot of times when I talk to an organization and we're doing a ransomware tabletop, one of the things we talk about is, all right, well, you have 50% of your workstations encrypted. How do you restore those? And what normally happens is we hear, all right, well, we just reimage those, they send it into us and they reimage it, and, that's fine. But all right, you have remote employees. Can you do it remotely? No. How long does it take you to reimage one laptop? 4 hours? Okay. You have 500 laptops you have to reimage. How are you going to do that? Yeah, you can do some in parallel, but you can't work your IT people to death. They can't work 24 hours a day for weeks on end. So there's a lot of other different things within that you have to take into account too as well. Not to paint, all doom and gloom, but there is, a lot to think about, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely a scary topic. Was that helpful, Holler? I hope this has answered your questions and this has been good information for you.
Yeah, no, this has been great. And I thank you for taking the time to talk with me about it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for being here. We love having callers with great questions and spawns good conversation. Now we're going to jump to our second caller. This is John in the southwestern United States. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. How can we help you today?
Well, managing infrastructure and being responsible for the data of a small company that has an international customer base. I'm curious, we're kind of bound by, at a minimum, multiple state laws, industry regulations like PCI DSS, and international regulations like GDPR, because we have customers in Asia and we have customers in Europe, and we maintain databases of customer information, basic customer information anyway. So what I'm wondering is, when suffering a breach or a ransomware incident, or maybe even you have the surfacing of a group of indicators of compromise that suggests that there may have been a breach, how do you find affordable resources to assist in defining an appropriate response to all the potentially thousands of parties entitled to some form of disclosure? It seems like reaching out for help from a digital forensics and incident response team from, say, CrowdStrike, for example, would be quite a financial event. And that pretty much touches on kind of the help or information that I'm looking for.
And I would 100% agree with you on that. Incident response is not cheap. It is a significant financial cost for the organization if you have to go down that route to do the forensics, to do the incident response. A couple of ways that I think that it can sometimes be more affordable for organizations. Obviously, if you have cyber insurance, typically, if you have cyber insurance, there are cyber insurance providers for incident response and forensics that are typically at a lower cost. They typically have to agree to a lower rate for the organization or to become on the panel. Sometimes you can keep it down that way. Now, of course, it's going to depend on your policy if it'll all be reimbursed or if you have a deductible that you have to spend. So if you have like a $100,000 deductible, probably doesn't matter who you're going with. But that's definitely one way. Another way is when you talk to an IR firm. If you have an incident and you do need to go down that route and have that forensics done, see if they can scope it down a little bit. Sometimes the more information you can give an organization, especially an IR organization, when you first call them, the easier it's going to be for them to scope it out. To kind of put it into perspective, if somebody calls me and they say, we've had a breach, and we start asking them questions, how many computers do you have on your network? They've got, 500 computers. All right, well, what was hit? We don't know. Do you have antivirus? No. Do you have firewall logs? Yes, but they're not centralized. They're only on the firewall. There's a lot of unknowns. And so we have to sometimes scope that out a little bit bigger than it might normally be. If it gets scoped out bigger, it's going to be more of a cost. So the more information you can give your IR team or the provider you're calling is going to help a lot. And AC, I think you mentioned this on a different call, that if you use like an MSP for your IT provider, a lot of times they either have partnerships that they can put you in touch with and get a lower cost, or they may even be able to do the incident response themselves. Now, I will admit, my experience with MSPs doing incident response, especially like pure IT MSPs, you have to kind of be careful there because they may have incident response listed on their list of services, but they really can't do it. They don't have the experience doing it. So just do the due diligence to make sure that they can actually do what they're saying that they can do for you. And I mean, the only other way that I know of keeping the cost down, and I'll fully admit, unfortunately, there's not a lot of really good like low cost options out there for incident response or forensics. I know and I think I mentioned this before, but if you are related to a state somewhere, there's a organization called MSISAC that you can go to and get free services. So if you're like owned by a state government or a city government or something like that, you can get it free there. But there's going to be some wait time before they can help you. In the end, though, it's always going to be a risk decision for the business to go down to see if they want to have IR done. Sometimes there will be contractual or regulatory obligations to have it done, so you kind of have to. But whenever you have an incident, your first priority should be recovering, and the second priority should be figuring out what happened. And hopefully those two can align, that you can do those simultaneously, but sometimes you can't do number two. One other thing that just came to mind too is if you do have an incident and you're talking to an incident response company, if they're not asking you questions about, what type of information you have or like what type of security you have in the environment. Do you have antivirus? Do you centralize logs? Things like that. That should be a red flag for you, because that's going to lead to higher costs. And what may end up happening is they may send you over a quote for, this huge bill, and they get in there and find out that they can't do anything. If I go into an environment and you have no logging set up and you have, no security software, and you want me to answer all these questions, I am likely not going to be able to answer 95% of those questions because that information doesn't exist. IR people, we're good. Forensics people, we're good, but we're not magic. If that data doesn't exist, we can't magically make it appear. So, you want to have an idea of, what questions you need answered, and then, just ask them, given what we have, do you think that we can answer, or do you think that you can answer these questions? They may come back and say, yes, we can, or we think we can. They may come back and say, we're not sure. It's going to depend on a couple things, and they may come back and say no. And I think that will also help define that kind of cost benefit analysis that you have to do for IR.
I think the unfortunate truth really is it's expensive. It's going to be expensive. You're dealing with very specialized people, as Tyler was saying. They're good. They're not magic, but they're very good. And they're working in an emergency situation that they can't necessarily plan for. It's very bursty from a capacity standpoint. So just their business model as well has very expensive people, and they've got this overhead that they've got to deal with. So prices are going to be high. Doing anything in this emergency situation is going to be expensive. So the ways I see, if I put on my CISO hat, that I can lower costs of these things really comes with preparation. How much can I do in advance? Like making sure that we know what to do and we have the plans in place, making sure we have the tools in place. Because if something happens and your IR provider starts saying, well, do you have antivirus installed? Do you have some sort of an endpoint detection and response tool already deployed on your systems? If you say no, because you haven't planned ahead to have the tools in place to get that information, those IR folks, they're going to be running up these billable hours deploying tools in your environment just to get the tools in place to do the work they have to do before they can start doing the value add work that you're actually wanting them to do. The way you kind of can bring costs down on an IR is really building the rest of your security program ahead of it to be prepared to make sure you have those capabilities to detect things and actively protect your equipment and your data when something's detected, and the ability to respond to them and, affect changes or whatever on these systems to do things remotely to react. And can you recover? Like, not having these tools in place puts you at a huge disadvantage. And if you're having to deploy those quickly, the cost continues to go up and up. So I think for most small businesses, just accepting that the emergency care is going to be very expensive. It's just like healthcare. The emergency care is very expensive. Preventive care is much less so. And so where you really want to, from a strategy standpoint, is, put as much as you can into the preventive care and those controls and protections and processes and practicing and drilling and knowing what you're going to do. And then also plan for the worst and make sure that you know who you're going to call and that you've got an IR firm available or an MSP available to help with this stuff. That's your worst case scenario, last ditch dive and catch, but it's all that prep work that's going to save you the money. And unfortunately, you got to spend money to save money in that case. And that's where a lot of small businesses also struggle, because they see those line items ahead of time and see them as just expenses and necessary evils. But man, once you get into one of these situations, you're going to be wishing that you had them, and you'd be willing to pay almost anything to have those things already in place and deployed, that maybe you decided not to buy a year ago.
So is there a resource that's available for somebody that's suddenly in that situation, and they can go and they can look and they've opened up the yellow pages and here's a long list of these companies that serve those purposes?
Yeah, there definitely are. So again, if you have cyber insurance, that's the first place that I would go to. See who their panel providers are, because that's probably going to be first off, they're going to be vetted out already by the insurance, and they're going to be approved for your policy. Outside of that, It really depends on the service, I think. I mean, there's no like security yellow pages, at least a reliable one that I know of. But a lot of times what I would start with is, looking for who's local to you, and just, jump on Google and, search your local area and then incident response, kind of see the list that comes up from there. If you have any, I mentioned this on an earlier call, but if you have like a local InfraGard or other like security organization, definitely go there and talk to the network and talk to the people there, because they're going to be able to give you recommendations of people or organizations that they've used for really any security service, and, who's good. Sorry, two things came to my mind. First is, look and see who's speaking at security conferences. I'm pretty sure that there's a security conference that happens every single day of the year, or pretty close. If you have like access to like Gartner or something like that, they also kind of keep track of that type of information. And even if you don't have access to those, you can usually find their reports either on their website for free or online in some place that can help you kind of at least look down to see who the big players are, or I guess more appropriately, who the more affordable players are.
Yeah, excellent points. So, John, I hope this was helpful. Did that answer your questions all right?
Well, you popped up a couple of things that have given me some thoughts about structuring. So, yeah, I think I've got disaster recovery pretty well handled, but yeah, what a can of worms.
Yeah, incident response is definitely a can of worms. So, but thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. It was great having you on the show.
Well, thank you. It was fun.
Yep. Thank you, sir. Man, Tyler, we have had really great conversation from these callers today. They've had wonderful questions and a lot of good information for our listeners. Any final thoughts you want to offer based on the questions, or maybe even questions that folks didn't ask or anything like that, as we close out the show?
I think one of the common theme that I was hearing from all the questions, or at least the answers that we were given to the questions, is, that preparation is key. What's the Boy Scout motto? Be prepared. That's really key when it comes down to incidents. And, I despite the fact that I work in incident response, I don't want organizations to have incidents, because I know the stress and the drama that happens with those. I would never wish that upon any organization, but inevitably it'll happen. And so like you had mentioned, make sure that you're preparing for this. Have that incident response plan. Look at what type of security you have in your organization, on the technical side, but also on, kind of the business side. Have those processes in place so that if somebody emails you and says, for example, hey, we just changed our bank account number, go ahead and pay that $1 million invoice to this new bank account number. Don't just automatically do that. Make sure that your accounting team, knows and understands about that, that they shouldn't just do that. And so really it just comes down to, I think, being prepared for this, taking those steps, finding those resources that we had mentioned, and at least getting that knowledge, I think, goes a long way to helping prevent these types of incidents, or even just getting through them as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Good closing thoughts. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or just see what you're doing and keep up with Tyler Hudak?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way is probably on Twitter. I'm SEC Shoggoth, SHOGGOTH. That's usually where you can find me. Outside of that, honestly, if anybody would want to email me directly and ask questions, it's tyler.hudak@trustedsec.com. Always willing to answer questions that I can. Promise I won't send you to sales right away unless you want to start talking more things. But really, I'm always happy to answer any questions that I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler, for being here. I really, really appreciate it. It's Friday afternoon, and I know don't want to keep working on Friday afternoons as we record this. So I really appreciate you taking time to meet with me here before you head to Beachside, Rochester. So that's another great conference for security folks. If you're in that area or any area, B-Sides conferences are great. If you happen to work in IT or security and you are looking to start going to conferences, they're really good local conferences. So, but yeah, thank you for being on the show, Tyler. And also a huge thank you to our listeners. We do this for you. So thank you for listening. If you find this valuable, or if you know anybody who would benefit from hearing what we were talking about today, please share this episode. This is a community service thing that we're doing. So I just want to make sure we get this information out into people's hands to be able to use it. And you can support the show as well by signing up to be a caller, or sharing the episode, like I said, or visiting our merch store shop at mindfulsmbshow.com. You get mugs and t-shirts and that kind of stuff with the Mindful Business Security Show logo on it, so you can go tell everybody about your love for the podcast if you so desire. So I appreciate everybody listening today, and I think that's it for this episode. Until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity. Tune in next time when we'll hear accidental CISO say,
I'm sitting over here on mute, just smiling and nodding and resisting the urge to just be like, yes, yes.